after years of pay freezes. And yes, the WASPI compensation scheme, which will be established through legislation, and we will also introduce the legislation that will scrap tuition fees once and for all. Urgent funding will be brought forward rapidly to tackle the funding crisis, yes, in our NHS, but also in our schools and education service. We'll be bringing forward the resources to establish free personal social care. And yes, free childcare for 2-, 3- and 4-year-olds. And we'll also bring it forward, because we face such a crisis with 700 people dying on our streets last year, we'll bring forward urgent homelessness support. And we'll start building those homes that are so desperately needed across our country. And yes, we'll inject more the much needed resources into the council services that have been targeted specifically by this government. We'll start a full comprehensive spending review to follow later in 2020, and that will allocate resources for a full 5-year term. So I can tell you today that as my first act as a Chancellor will be to write to the Office for Budget Responsibility, and we'll ask them to begin their preparations for my first budget, which will be given on the 5th of February. The date when almost 10 years of cuts will come to an end. And when it happens, it will be down to the millions who stood up against what they saw has been happening in our society. Just in the last few weeks, we've seen the dedication, the creativity of Labour Party members, ordinary people up and down the country, inspiring us and inspiring millions of others by stepping up to this challenge. And the last few days, as we push hard as we can for every vote we need on Thursday, I think we should be immensely proud of what we've already achieved in this campaign. There will always be those at the top who will do anything to stop us. And we've seen it. Character assassinations, lies and smears, taken, I believe, to a new level in British politics. But the more people we convince on the doorstep, the more they ramp up their attacks. Because those who've had it good for so long, yes, are terrified. They're terrified of losing control. And when they attack me or Jeremy, we know it's not really about us. It's about you. It's about the people of our country. Some of them hate the people of our country. They think, and I quote the Prime Minister, that working people are drunk and criminal. They hate the idea that our people, you might dream of a better life. They hate the idea that you might want real change in how things have gone on for so long, and how you want to say and how things are done in the future. So no wonder they'll stop at nothing to keep you from taking control of the country where you live and which you've given so much to. When they come to write the history books and write about when it all began to turn round, and when your children and your grandchildren ask you, what did you do to end rough sleeping? What did you do to end the food banks? What did you do to save the NHS and stop the Tories selling it off to Trump? What did you do just to take back pride in our country and in our town? And yes, what did you do to finally wrestle back control from those who've kept it to themselves for so long? I think you can tell them. It all began when we voted Labour, when together we laid the foundations of that new society, foundations so deeply rooted that no Tory government could ever tear them up again. You can tell them it was when we proved once and for all that the doubters were wrong, that the doubters were always wrong, that another world really is possible, and we're about to deliver it. Thank you.
So, John's now going to take some questions. Let me make a very small point first. I used to be a whip. I used to be his whip. It wasn't the easiest gig I had. And I'm going to be quite firm. We're not like Boris Johnson. We don't avoid scrutiny. We believe in a free press. Even if the question is hostile, we believe the newspaper or the outlet is hostile or the reporter is hostile. We will not be booing people. It is not our politics. Okay? And frankly, unlike the poor excuse we currently have as a Prime Minister, there isn't a question that John can't answer. So I'm going to take people from the press first, and then I'm going to open it up to the floor. I can barely see you, so I'm just going to have to go with the eyes rather than the names.
Thank you. Norman Smith, BBC. Mr. McDonnell, you've set out a very radical, ambitious agenda, which I'm sure will go down very well with your supporters. But to implement it, you have to win an election. So what do you say to middle-income, middle-of-the-road voters who are not traditional Labour supporters and hear your message of radical change and think that means more uncertainty, more upheaval after the whole Brexit drama? And is there anything you can say to reassure them, or is the danger that you just frighten them?
Let's be clear about what we're saying on Brexit. We will negotiate a deal within 3 months, and we'll bring that back to the British people. It will be the people that decide. The people will have the final say, but they'll have the final say on a sensible and credible leave option, which will protect jobs and the economy, or the option of remain. It will be the people that decide. But, you know, our agenda is radical because people are demanding radical change. People, I believe, right across the classes, are actually want to live in a society where they feel safe and secure, where they have an NHS that can provide the care that they need when their families are sick, that they can rely upon an education system that will give our children the best life opportunities that we can. And yes, I think also what's been driven home, maybe actually by our children, is that we face an existential threat. And this next 5 years are the key 5 years for that. And I think people have woken up to that. And this appeal is to everybody, that we need to get to work quickly. And the only party that's offering that ability to rebuild our social fabric, tackle the climate emergency, is the Labour Party. And in that way, I think that will enable us not just to deliver a Labour government, but to deliver the profound change that we need after 10 years of being held back by Tory austerity. That's the reassurance that we can give people, that we're working on their agenda set to us by the British people.
Paul Wall from HuffPost. Mr. McDonnell, you stressed repeatedly the climate change emergency. Tony Blair famously said on the eve of the 97 election, there are 24 hours to save the NHS. Today it sounds like you're saying there's 4 days to save the planet. Or at least for Britain to make a serious contribution to tackling it. Is that correct? Would that be fair to say that? And secondly, Keir Starmer said on Friday he'd vote again for Remain in another referendum. Would you do the same?
Okay. Let's be clear what we're dealing with here. We're dealing with a twin emergency. One is the emergency we face in our social fabric, and the second is climate emergency. And I think this next few days, and on Thursday, is the opportunity to tackle both. So it does mean saving the NHS. And I don't know whether many of you saw that picture of a child this morning being treated in the Leeds General Informed for pneumonia on the floor. That's how bad it's got after 10 years of austerity. So we need to tackle that emergency. That's happening in our hospitals, our GP surgeries, our clinics right the way across the country. But also we have to recognise this next 5 years are going to be key if we could stand any chance of tackling climate change whatsoever. So there is a twin emergency facing our country, and this next few days are absolutely key in making sure that we stand any chance of addressing them. That's why, as I say, our children and grandchildren, if we don't rise to this challenge, I don't think they'll ever forgive us, and they'd be right. Oh, sorry. With regard to the situation. As you know, we'll negotiate another deal. I'll assess that deal at the time in terms of whether it's a credible option and protects the jobs. I'm sure that what we've negotiated in our discussions with the European Union in the past, I believe that we'll be able to achieve. I've said consistently about I can't see a better deal than Remain, but when we bring that deal back, people will make their own assessment of it, and I will as well. But the bottom line is we will protect jobs and the economy no matter what comes out of this, but it will be the people that decide. It will be the people who decide this issue once and for all. And then, and I don't think any other leader could do this other than Jeremy Corbyn, at that time we'll have the opportunity then of bringing people back together.
Shihab Khan, ITV News. You've repeatedly mentioned taking public utilities into public ownership. Nationalisation seems to be one of your key policies. Private investors may not be willing to sell you their shares unless you pay well over market value. Is there a price that you're not willing to pay, or is this just a blank cheque that you're willing to spend?
No, it's not a blank cheque. We'll go through the normal exercises. Every other elements of public ownership have been done in the past. Parliament will determine the price, and bonds will be issued for shares. And in that way, we'll have a smooth transfer, because this has become actually interesting enough in opinion poll after opinion poll when we've been raising these issues. Opinion poll after opinion poll has demonstrated overwhelming support for bringing these basic public utilities back into public ownership. Why? Because they're mostly natural monopolies, but secondly also because people feel ripped off. And we believe actually we can, under public ownership and management in the form that we've set out now, not the old-fashioned nationalisation, but new forms of public ownership in which people are in control, the workers, the users, the consumers, the passengers, and yes, of course, expert management. We can manage them effectively, make sure that they're contributing to the wider policy agenda of climate change as well, and at the same time, reduce bills. In that way, I think we're responding to that demand now that the British people have had enough of being ripped off by privatisation, exploited by profiteers. And what we want now is long-term stable investment in those basic public utilities to provide us with the best possible services.
Gentleman at the back. Yeah.
Thank you, John. Do you accept that the election is going to be won and lost in Labour heartlands, the sort of seats where the Prime Minister is campaigning today, and that all the evidence is that people who've not voted Conservative for generations are ready to do so on Thursday? Why do you think that is?
I think it's going to be won or lost right the way across the country. I think you'll find that there'll be some surprising results right the way across the country. And isn't it interesting that as the Prime Minister tours around different constituencies, he finds it incredibly difficult even to mix with people because of the response he's leaving and what we're getting back on the doorstep. He's most probably the least trusted politician that people have ever experienced. And Arlene Foster, I think, has come to a judgment this morning, which was echoed right the way across the country. This is a man whose word you cannot trust.
You don't fear that Labour voters are going to desert?
What we're finding on the doorstep is Labour voters now are looking back on what's happened over the last near decade of austerity as a result of Tories and Lib Dem governments together, and they've had enough. I think they want real change. And I think what you'll see is, despite what's happening in the opinion polls, although the opinion polls have consistently been trending towards us, I think you'll see, as some of you were shocked in the 2017 general election, I think you'll be even more shocked this time round.
Jason Farrell, Sky News. Let me take you back to a question you asked yourself back in 2017 at a fringe event in Labour conference. You said, what happens if there's a run on the pound? What happens if there's the concept of capital flight? I don't think there will be, but you never know. So we've got a scenario plan for that with less than a week until a possible Labour government. Can you tell us what that plan is?
And I said very, very clearly there wouldn't be. There wouldn't be. And that's all the advice that we've been getting. In fact, my fear is that the pound will start going up because of our investment plans. And what we need to do now is make sure I think what we need to do is make sure, let's be clear, what we need to do is make sure that the message goes out that when Labour comes into power, We'll be implementing our manifesto. We'll have a large-scale investment programme where, yes, private investors as well will be able to get a decent rate of return, but we will not be ripped off. But in addition to that, we'll bring stability. Will be stability to decision-making, particularly around Brexit. The markets realise that with regard to Brexit, there is no way the promises that the government, Mr. Johnson is proffering are in any way truth or implementable. And they're fearful of another round of instability, but above all else, they're fearful of dropping off the edge within less than 12 months into a no-deal Brexit, which Boris Johnson continues to threaten. What we need is a Labour government with a healthy majority implementing its plan, bringing stability over investment for the long term, because that's what all businesses are telling me is needed, and then stability over Brexit as decided by the British people themselves. It's interesting when people start talking about run on the pound and all the rest of it. I just ask them to explore the recent history of the pound under the Tory government and suggest to commentators that actually the instability brought about by a combination of incompetent management of the economy, exaggerated claims about what's potentially available in terms of deals under Brexit, the threat of a no deal, and then the markets recognising that we have a Prime Minister whose word cannot be trusted. How can they have faith in our economy when it's managed by someone who, as I said last week about Donald Trump, has a passing relationship with the truth?
John, the Sunday Times reported yesterday that in the event of a Labour defeat, there could be an interim leader to oversee a leadership contest next year with you as a potential figurehead. Is that something that you can categorically rule out? And secondly, you say it's an emergency in terms of climate change. If there is a Tory government, will you be encouraging Extinction Rebellion to increase their protests? Okay.
On the two questions themselves, one, it's not going to happen because we're going to have a majority Labour government. Two, it's not going to happen. Two, it's not going to happen because we're going to have a majority Labour government. So, and I take nothing for granted. I just think that people have had enough. They've had enough of austerity. They've had enough of being lied to by Boris Johnson and his colleagues. And I think they've had enough of the irresponsibility of a Tory government completely ignoring the climate change threat and the crisis our public services are undergoing. That's why I think they'll want real change. But it will be dependent on turnout. And the most important thing now is to make sure people turn out and vote on the day. And make sure that they realise just how significant this election is. This is the most important election facing any of us for generations, because it is about the future of our climate, our planet itself, but it's also about the future of our public services and the nature of the society that we want to live in. I do not want to live in a society where 700 people, homeless, died on our streets last year. I do not want to live in a society where a child with pneumonia is treated on the floor of one of our hospitals. I don't want to live in a society where there's such grotesque levels of inequality. And when we come into government on Friday, we'll start tackling those problems and challenges in earnest, but we'll do it together as a community and as a country.
I'm with the press at the moment, so...
We've had enough of that.
You've never had enough of the press. Not at all.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah, we got a...
Thank you. Harry York from the Daily Telegraph. Mr McDonnell, yesterday you acknowledged that anti-Semitism in the Labour Party may have harmed your electoral chances. But one of the things that keeps coming up in focus groups is that your manifesto and your spending plans are so vast that voters don't believe you can deliver on them. In hindsight, do you think that you've gone too far in this campaign?
Okay. I dealt with anti-Semitism yesterday, and I accepted quite an emotional appeal, but that's how strongly I feel about it, and we're dealing with it, simple as that, and we always will. With regard to our spending plans, what we've tried to do is get across to people, and I think they feel this as well, the scale of the emergencies we face, the scale of the challenges we face. And that means we have to scale up our response, and that's what we've done. But yes, the combination of, with greatest respect, Tory lies and some of their friends in the media reiterating those ad nauseum, and at the same time, that feeling of 10 years of austerity, narrowing in people's horizons, have had some effect. So what we've been doing is the thing that the Conservatives can't ever do. Actually, we have nearly 500,000 members. We've been on the doorstep explaining in persuasive conversations what we mean, what problems we face, how we'll implement them. But more importantly, Lynn and I and my whole team, we've been touring around for nearly 2 years, town by town, every other Saturday. That's why we look so absolutely shattered. Not you, Lynn. Not you, look lovely. You look lovely. You look lovely. Me, I meant. But we've been touring around. We've been having town hall meetings. And we go along and we say, some of you have heard this, we go along and we say, here's the statistics for your local economy. You tell us what it's like. We go along and say, here's our menu of policies. You tell us what's needed. Will these work? Will they won't? What else do we need to do? And our manifesto has been written from the grassroots upwards in that way. And it's been buzzing with ideas. And then we've done the regional manifestos based upon the detail of where people want that investment, the sort of jobs they want, the public services that they need. And it's just been an exercise of fundamental democracy within our society. And I think it's been one of the most exciting things we've done. Maybe not hit the headlines, but having 150 to 250 people in a room all day Saturday telling us and talking about, and they're business leaders, trade unions, local community representatives, and yes, lots of Labour Party members and others. A lot of voluntary organisations turning up. That's been one of the most thrilling things we've done, the most effective things we do. So we've built confidence from the grassroots upwards that change is needed and change can happen. They've told it that, look, the establishment keeps telling us there is no alternative. It's gone on for nearly 40 years. There is no alternative. Well, people have had enough. They said there is, and we're going to make sure that alternative is implemented. And it starts on Friday morning with the Labour government when Jeremy Corbyn turns up on his bicycle and takes off his bicycle clips and walks up to Downing Street, and we go into government.
Thank you, Mr. McDonnell. Adam Crichton from The Australian. The Australian Labor Party earlier this year was defeated on a very modest set of policy proposals. I'm just wondering whether one of the lessons of that election, and as a more general principle, you would urge social democratic parties around the world to be a lot more ambitious, like the British Labor Party is.
Look, people need to do what they think are the challenges within their own country. And they need to develop their own individual policies and policy programs. And I think that's what we've done. It's interesting, it has inspired others. I think we've helped inspire the debate as well within the US, where the debate around radical policies has caught the wind. And all the Democratic candidates now are aspiring policies that maybe 5 or 10 years ago they wouldn't have even considered. And I think that's happening in a number of countries. So we don't take any leading role or anything like that. We just try and do our best. But we've engaged. We had an international social forum where we invited leaders of social movements from around the world to discuss with us the sort of global challenges that we face. And we're working now on the programme that was discussed from there and to develop over the next 6 to 9 months. And it is about global change. And looking at our global institutions, the World Bank, the IMF, UN, the sort of role that they can play, because all of them now, as described by one of our advisors, Joe Stiglitz, not fit for purpose and therefore need to be repurposed. And for what? The same objectives as us, tackling climate change and addressing global inequality, not just inequality within our society. I think we're on an agenda whose time has come. It's an agenda that we need rapidly to implement as well.
Thank you. It's Matthew Holhurst from MLEX. Could you tell us, please, what the tech giants should expect from a Labour government? We know about your policy for higher taxes to pay for broadband. Your manifesto raises the prospect of tackling their grip in advertising markets and the monopoly risk that they pose. Can you talk a bit about how you propose to do that? Is this about changing the competition regime? And finally, are you interested in Elizabeth Warren's idea to break up tech giants entirely? Thank you.
What we've done is we've had a working group for the last 18 months or so under Professor Prem Sikka, who's been looking at regulation overall. He's put forward the proposal of a business commission, which looks at the whole range of regulation that we need in all different sectors. That includes finance. It includes actually dramatic reforms of Companies House, for example, bringing it under that business commission. We're also looking at the issues of how we address the tech sector to the future. Yes, we have said, it's not just tech, we've said about the need for a taxation regime that enables the multinationals to contribute to our economy on the basis of an apportionment of their profits, taxing their profits, which will be based upon looking at their operation within this country. It's unitary taxation, a debate that's been had and promoted by the IMF and others. But we will be looking, yes, about the market role of those tech companies and their dominance in certain sectors. I'm not sure whether it's about breaking them up or whether it's about proper regulation. That will be the debate and the discussion that we'll be having. But there are clearly issues of accountability, and there are clearly issues around the fair treatment of them as a sector as against other sectors. I think it's an interesting debate. So far, all we've had from the Conservatives is an attempt to increase some levels of taxation for a fairly minor way, and virtually no debate within government. By our debate that's been going on with the Labour Party and beyond, I think has opened up fresh horizons about the role of those tech companies across the whole reach of society as well, not just on taxation and not just on the building of monopolies, but also on their specific role as well and their influence. I welcome that debate, but actually you're right, it is not just it's not just a UK debate, it can never be. It's got to be a global debate that we're having, and I'm glad that's now started in America as well.
I'm only allowed to take one more question.
Okay.
So,
go on, there's two of you.
Okay.
We'll have two, go on.
Go on.
Dennis
I
Staunton.
might regret this, go on.
Dennis Staunton from the Irish Times.
Yeah.
Will the Brexit deal that you negotiate with Brussels treat Northern Ireland in exactly the same way as the rest of the UK in terms of customs and regulation? And secondly, sorry, you mentioned Arlene Foster twice, warmly. If
I'm a warm human being.
If the DUP holds the balance of power again, could you work with them?
Right, okay. On that last point, what we'll do is we'll go in as a majority Labour government. If we were in a minority position with no deals, no pacts, no coalitions or anything like that, we'll put forward our programme and we'll implement that programme. It will be up for other parties to actually take their decisions on what aspect of that programme they'll support or those that they don't. I actually think, over the years, you might find this surprising, but over the years I've worked with individual DUP politicians. I can't see them voting against a real living wage. I can't see them voting against the levels of investment that we want to put in, right the way across the country, including in Northern Ireland. I can't see them voting against the funding that we want to put into the NHS, our education, our public services overall. So I would expect them to support Labour government's programme as we implement it. With regard to the European Union, we've made our position clear that we want a new permanent customs union. And that was part of our negotiations in 6 weeks of negotiations with the Theresa May cabinet. That actually fell out in front of us. It was a bit embarrassing for them. But and what we made that as one of the foundation stones of any future agreement. And that would enable, therefore, Northern Ireland to continue on as it is, and it would not in any way undermine the Good Friday Agreement, which we uphold so strongly.
Last one.
Mr. McDonnell, Dan Bloom from the Daily Mirror. You've said it yourself, it's been a pretty gruelling, hard-fought campaign.
I've enjoyed it.
If you win on Friday, what will be the first thing you do personally for yourself when that black door of number 11 closes behind you? And if I may, if you don't win, would you step aside from your post immediately, or do you think it's right to stay in office for a while in that situation?
On the second question, we're going to win. What we'll be doing, that literally within minutes of the general election result being known, literally within minutes, We'll be meeting with the Permanent Secretary, with HMRC, and we'll be getting the letter off to the OBR to start the first budget process. There's got to be a sense of urgency about what we do, and there will be. That's why having that budget 8 weeks from this Wednesday, as soon as we possibly can in February, is absolutely key for us. So we'll start work immediately. We'll start work immediately. That's personally, well, Lynn is telling me what I've been living off for the last 4 weeks, but it's a product that actually I don't want to receive large numbers of, so I won't mention, okay? but it contains chocolate and a biscuit. But actually we'll have those whilst we're preparing the first budget. Okay, thanks a lot.
I'm really sorry to those of you who had questions and weren't able to answer them. We were restricted on time, but I'm really grateful to you all for coming and for it being such a fabulous, comradely event this morning. Thank you.